This is one of my favorite stories in the Gospels. We've spent a lot of time in the Gospel of Matthew lately, so I wanted to look into a different gospel. So we're going to read a little story from the Gospel of Luke. This sermon is not really part of a series of any kind. It's just a sermon I felt that was needed to be preached. It was on my heart. And it was after reading Luke 5, just in my devotional life. I read this about a week ago, and I thought, man, that kind of inspired me. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about wonder and amazement. And so I want you to follow along in the story, beginning in verse 17. Luke 5, verse 17. I won't have all these verses on the screen this week. I'll have just a little important quote here and there. But Luke chapter 5, verse 17. On one of those days, as he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and Judea and from Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was with him to heal. Now, that's Jesus, if you're not aware. So Jesus is teaching and healing, and all these should be friends, but happen to typically be enemies of Jesus, have gathered from all over the place. And behold, verse 18, some men were bringing on a bed a man who was paralyzed, and they were seeking to bring him in and lay him before Jesus. But finding no way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down with his bed through the tiles into the midst before Jesus. I'm going to pause for a second. When I was a kid, I had a Bible storybook someone had bought us, and my mom and dad used to read that to us at night, and it had pull tabs. You remember when kids' books had pull tabs and made things move? Do they still make those? My kids don't have much of that. They have some cool things, but I don't have any of those now. But I had that book, and I loved it, and this story was in that book, and there was a man on a mat, and you would pull the tab, and it made him come through the roof down onto the floor and back up. I have a vivid memory of pulling that little tab and eventually tearing the cardboard off because it was overused. I love this story. Verse 20, when Jesus saw their faith, not the man's faith, but his friends. That's not today's sermon, but it is a sermon. Sometimes you just need faithful friends. He said, man, your sins are forgiven you. The scribes and the Pharisees began to question, saying, who is this who speaks blasphemies? Who could forgive sins but God alone? When Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answered them, why do you question in your hearts? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven you, or to say rise and walk? But just so you can know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the man who was paralyzed, I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and walk home. Immediately he rose up before them and picked up what he had been lying on, and he went home glorifying God. And here's the verse I want to focus on. And amazement seized them all, and they glorified God, and they were filled with wonder, saying, we have seen extraordinary things today. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I love the movie The Santa Claus with Tim Allen, and I'm pretty sure that's where the quote, sometimes seeing isn't believing, comes from. I think the little boy, Charlie, is mad that nobody believes him about Santa, and he's like, seeing isn't always believing. You believe in air, right, but you don't see it. Something like that. Some little, snarky remark. Oh, he's a sweet kid in the movie, but even sweet kids say snarky stuff. Anyway, I disagree with that quote today. I think sometimes seeing is believing. In fact, sometimes I have to see it to believe it. Oftentimes, because I am incredibly cynical and skeptical, I have to see to believe. And Jesus, I think, knew that a lot of people are like that we are cynical and skeptical and that we need to see to believe. He knew doubting Didymus or Thomas would have to touch the wounds to really believe that it was Jesus. Sometimes Jesus appreciates our limited capacity to accept things, and so he makes a way for us. He allows us to be cynical at times. And not only allows it, he plays into it. He helps us. Here we see religious teachers, and they want answers. They want explanations. They want to know, and Jesus says, well, you're not going to know, you're not going to understand, so I will help you to see. I will show you, because seeing is believing. At least it can be. And so he offers a demonstration of his glory, and for Jesus, it's enough. For many of the crowds, it was enough. Now, the religious leaders, some of them were still skeptical. After all they had seen, eventually, at one point, they're willing to crucify him. So sometimes, even seeing isn't enough for us to really believe. But for many people there, and it's the other people that I want to focus on, those mentioned in verse 26, who were seized with amazement. That's a powerful phrase, isn't it? Seized with amazement. And standing in awe and wonder, they began to glorify God. They saw extraordinary things. I want to talk about those people, because some of those people were at my sister's wedding last week. Not those people from 2,000 years ago. People of like mind. People who were amazed, who were crying as a lovely young couple shared their vows in the presence of friends and family. There's a reason I wasn't here to preach last week. I was officiating my sister's wedding. My little sister, who most of our childhood was bigger than me, but that's okay. There were all these loving family and friends gathered there. It was standing room only because of, hurricane rains coming across Kentucky at that point. So we were packed in that little room, and then had a really nice reception afterwards. And I got to see all these people that I hadn't seen, some of them in a decade, some who had never met my children, some whose children I had never met, and we got to catch up and spend time together. But in that room, in that space with all these lovely people, there were a bunch of people from my life who do not attend church. Maybe over half of the people there, I might guess, don't regularly attend church. I come from a family and friend groups that are just kind of diverse. And many of them are not seriously religious in any way. And so a lot of those people were there who Sunday would not be at church, but Saturday were listening to scripture being read and watching an ancient religious tradition like a wedding ceremony and crying and praising God for the beauty of love and commitment and fidelity and just the beauty of a wedding, all the good stuff about it. So why are they not, if they can recognize God in that moment, why are they not part of a church? Why are they not more religious? And I wrestle with that. I'm a pastor. It's my job. So I think about that a lot. I think, why are people not in church? Why are these family and friends that I know they're good and decent people? They stayed after and helped clean up and put stuff back in boxes and load up a trailer, and they're wonderful human beings. Why are they not at church? Why are they not at least seriously Christian? They might say they believe in God, but why don't they take it more seriously? I wrestle with that. I thought about it, actually. So I came up with some answers, possible answers. The first one was, there just aren't enough churches. Nah, I don't think that's it. It didn't take me long to shoot that one down, right? There are churches on every corner. Every daggone corner of every road, there's a church. There are usually strips in cities that have 15 churches in a row. The first church of this, the first church of that, the second church of this, because they changed the carpet 50 years ago, the third church of this, because one preacher came in and had some various beliefs that splintered from the main group, and then you got another first church of this, and then the community church that used to be Baptist, but they got rid of that to be more attractive and relevant, and all the other churches, right? I was trying to be funny there, but that's a little church humor. So you got all the different churches on Church Row. Every town has them. You have churches everywhere. It's not because there aren't enough churches. If my friends and family wanted to go to church, they wouldn't have any problem finding one. So then maybe it's the things they teach in the church. Perhaps it's bad doctrine or theology. Maybe my family and friends are doctrinaires. They're just so theologically accurate that they can't handle the discrepancies they find in the local church. But I don't think that's it either, because I have found churches with all sorts of diverse and various doctrine, theologies, even traditions and practices. I don't think it's the type of church. There's just about any type of church you want to find in Gallia County, let alone in a bigger city like Louisville. So I don't think it's the doctrine or the theology. And it's certainly not because their church needs to get it all right. None of us get it all right. Surely you don't believe that our church has 100% accurate theology. I hope you're not that naive. We all make mistakes, right? It can't be that they're perfectly true and right. There's got to be something else. Then I thought, well, the political landscape is kind of wild, isn't it? You've been on the internet, you know. You've turned on the news, if you could call it news anymore. Sermon for another time. So conservative, liberal, I don't know, maybe it's the church just isn't in the right place on that spectrum with social issues. So maybe the theology isn't the problem, or the worship, or the traditions. Maybe it's their social status. Maybe my family and friends are just too liberal. But there are good mainline liberal churches that are trying to serve the poor and the marginalized, who are much more open and affirming and trying to do things that conservatives might not be big fans of. Those are out there. There are options for that. And certainly, we're in the Bible Belt, and Louisville is still close enough to the Bible Belt. There are plenty of conservative, more fundamental churches. And then there's everything in between on the spectrum. They could find a church that socially fits their taste, if that's what we want to call it. So I don't think it's that either. And then I had to be real honest with myself, and I thought maybe it's a lack of love. That's often the excuse I've heard. The church doesn't know how to love well. They're too judgmental, too hateful, not accepting. They don't love like they should. That used to bother me. I was almost haunted by that. And then my life experience has proven it false. There isn't a place I go where there are sick or needy people that have not been visited or prayed for by Christians. There's not a town I know of where Christians aren't trying to help people in their community. Not all the Christians and not all the time, but there are plenty of loving, good Christian people trying to love their neighbors. Enough of them that I don't think you could say Christians just don't know how to love anybody. I think there are lots of good and loving Christians in every place. So I don't even think it's love. I think we could all learn to love better, to love more deeply, to love more consistently. But there are Christians out there who love in every church. So it's not that. And then I was kind of stumped. I thought those are all the easy answers. Like those are the excuses people give. So why are my family and friends not in church? And I'll be real blunt. I'm going to choose a word carefully. Apathy. I think it's apathy. And I don't mean that as in they don't care about God or religion or the people that are in the church. I think they're probably interested in God and interested in a faith and claim to have some sort of faith. And they probably appreciate all that the local churches do for people. But at the end of the day, they've lost their sense of wonder, their awe and amazement. Christians are no longer, people in general, seem to be no longer seized by amazement. Not the way they were in Luke 5. And I think that creates a void, a sort of apathetic wandering through life where nothing ever really amazes you at all and you just trudge along until you die. And you pay taxes by necessity and complain about that too, and then you die. Isn't that what Ben Franklin said? All that's left for man to do is pay taxes and die. That's all you have to do. Some depressing thing like that. I think the church is less relevant in today's world because it's kitschy. It's a little Sunday morning tourist trap. Pop on in here, donate some money. Let's all shake hands and glad hand our neighbors for 5 minutes, then sing some songs, listen to a 30-minute, 40 to 45-minute monologue, whatever it is. And then shake hands again, maybe in the lobby, and peace out. And if you get a chance, grab a donut too, okay? Maybe even buy a t-shirt. Make sure everybody knows you went to Gallipolis Christian Church this week. I do want you to buy those t-shirts, though. I'm a real bad sales pitch right now. This is not good. But, I mean, you feel it, don't you? That we don't really have the capacity to wonder like we used to. People don't have an imagination. And the little bit we had left, AI is destroying it, right? It's making a mockery of the human imagination. It's wild. The world we live in doesn't care about imagining things. It's certainly not a creative place like it used to be. Ironically, we have most access, more than we've ever had, to art and music and information and cross-cultural education and diversity of thought, more than we've ever had as a human population, and yet people seem to be increasingly less inspired and creative and in wonder. It's a weird thing. I don't know that I can explain it, but I know Plato acknowledged this 2 millennia ago. He said, all philosophy begins with wonder. I actually do have that quote. All philosophy begins with wonder. It's a good quote, isn't it? I think it's true. I would add to it, all wonder leads us to God. All wonder, all beauty leads us to God. If every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above in heavenly lights, then it must be true that wonder leads us to God. But what if our worship, our preaching, our Bible studies, our fellowship meals, our little get-togethers we do as Christians, I mean, we are Christians. I don't know why I did air quotes. Forgive me for that. I do think we're really Christians. But what if all that stuff we do it never gets into the space of wonder? What if we're never awed or amazed or inspired by anything? And it would be hard to be amazed by nature when you're in a room that has 2 fake stained glass windows and no other access to the outside world, which has driven me nuts for a decade now. We can't even see all that's good and beautiful out there. I'm not saying we need to tear holes in the walls. I mean, if somebody's really good at installing windows, it'd be kind of neat to have some more natural light, but whatever. I digress. The world out there is amazing, and we've blocked it out. Babies, we put them in a nursery. Which all the beautiful and most amazing things about life, we just kind of shove them to the periphery so we can focus on the nitty-gritty, getting it done. It's just a bizarre thing that humans do. It's like we don't have time to be bothered, to be amazed, or to wonder. I have hiked and been more concerned about the time on my Apple Watch and getting through the trail and getting back to the car because I have a meeting later, just because I wanted to go on a morning hike. I've literally done that. Rushed myself through a hiking trail that I went to specifically to have a little time out in nature. And I don't even look at a single leaf or anything because I'm just trying not to trip on tree roots and get back to my car. What is that? I thought of 15 other examples in my head, but I don't have time. Leanne Womack said, "I hope you never lose your sense of wonder," right? Kylie said I had to sing it because you wouldn't know the reference if I didn't sing it. I said, these are Gallia Countyans. They know old country music. And don't say that's not old, because it is now. That's old now. I know that's sad for some of you. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Gregory of Nyssa, probably my favorite early leader in the church, he said, and I read this just the other day, and I thought this goes so well with my sermon. He wrote that concepts create idols. Concepts, like sitting and thinking about things and coming up with things, doctrine, theology, even some of that, create idols. Only wonder comprehends anything. Only wonder comprehends anything. He went on to say, people kill one another over idols, over concepts in the brain. Wonder makes us fall to our knees. I've never seen anyone kill someone else because of the beauty of a mountain range. But I've seen many people worship God at the top of a mountain. I've done it myself in the chimney tops in Tennessee. I remember that better than I remember almost any class I ever took in Bible college. I remember hiking up the chimney tops trail, and reading a psalm at the top of a mountain and just looking at that vista and thinking, who could have made this? It's powerful. Wonder. The problem is I went to classes 4 days a week, every week for 4 years of my adult life, and I only hiked that trail a handful of times. I don't have capacity to wonder. What I think Gregory of Nyssa was struggling with in the early church was all the division that was developing. You don't need to know all this history, but the Antiochene and Alexandrian schools of thought were starting to butt heads. The East and the West were starting to disagree a little bit here and there in their beliefs and traditions and practices. And as the church spread those early centuries, there was more and more division. And Gregory of Nyssa said, you're dividing over the wrong things. You're dividing over concepts and human ideals. Of course that's going to divide people. People kill over that. You should be worshiping together. Then you'll all fall to your knees as one before God, who is awe-inspiring. He was trying to save the church from self-destruction, at least from splintering again and again, which inevitably did happen. We have to have a capacity for wonder in order to worship rightly. We know it's true. Jesus was trying to teach that to his contemporaries. Probably forgot we read Luke 5 earlier. A story where people are amazed by God and they can't help but glorify God. The Pharisees and Sadducees and teachers of the law, the scribes, they all come to Jesus over and over again and they say, give us answers, give us information, give us concepts. And he just keeps showing them amazing things. And they can't stand it. Why? Because you can kill over concepts. Eventually they make up a concept and say he's a blasphemer and he wishes he were Caesar, and that's how they get to crucify him. Jesus never said any of that, right? But they have to make up a concept so that they can crucify this man, because all he ever does is lead people to worship. All he does is bring them to a place of awe and wonder. And I've missed it all the times I've studied the Gospels, and I haven't really seen that. But it's there on every page. And just like the ancient Pharisees and scribes, we have We've relegated God to a little dark corner where he pulls the proverbial strings of life. And every so often, maybe on Sunday morning, we make the occasional request of his divine presence to come in and do something for us. Or we make a complaint when he didn't pull the string we thought he should pull. And that's God, just this being off in the corner who's there when we need him. There's no awe or wonder. We're unable to see God in our everyday lives. We're too busy. We're too comfortable. We're not going to slow down and be amazed by things. We have too much to do. In fact, the only time I need God is when I can't do it all and I need him to help me do it. All things are possible through Christ. And I only quote that when I'm trying to get more done and I can't seem to do it myself. I don't look at a mountain and think, who could make that? Oh, all things are possible through Christ. I guess God could make that. I don't think that. I've never used that verse in that context until this moment. Because that verse just means to help me get done what I need to get done because life is hard and busy. And we forget where all the things we love and all the things that make life beautiful, the reasons we want to live in the first place, we forget to stop and think about those things and where they come from and who designed them and who gave them to us as blessings. Until we have those captivating moments, like standing before a young couple declaring their vows of love and faithfulness to each other. And in the beauty of a wedding ceremony where I preach about the wonders of love, unfailing, unconditional, not proud, not arrogant, not insisting on its own way, but love that endures, that never fails. When I talk about that kind of love, and eyes are welling up with tears, because it's wonderful. Because something in us knows that that is beautiful, that it's good, that it's higher than some of this. And so we're brought to a place of worship. Whether we acknowledge it or not, that's what happens. But if God is simply our excuse for the ordered universe, just an explanation for why things are the way they are, or someone who can help us when things are rough or difficult, if he's just a divine thread of judgment to ensure that people are well behaved, and don't fail to believe that some people see God that way. He's just there to punish evil and reward good. He's like a divine Santa Claus all year long. It's bizarre, but people think that. If that's God, then it's no wonder that that sort of God has not inspired my friends and family to go to church and worship week after week. Of course not. That's no God at all. That's not the God I see in the Bible. I thought about it this week. I made some notes. Here's the God I see in the Bible. What about this God who zips past Abraham and almost kills the man because of a reflection he left on the face of a rock? Think about that God. What about the God who met Moses on Mount Sinai and he left his face beaming so that when he came down from the mountain, everyone was afraid to even approach him because he had been near the presence of God? What about the transfigured Christ glowing on the mountaintop, leaving Peter nonsensically mumbling about building tents and staying here forever and ever? And Jesus says, come on, man, we got to go. You're talking out of your head. A light, a glory that makes a very reasonable man, a blue-collar fisherman, lose his ever-loving mind. What about that God? The God who provides for the birds of the air and the flowers of the field, who makes his rains to fall on the just and the unjust, who makes the seas to be still. What about that God? What of the God whose image we see in the face of every newborn infant? Who has not looked at a newborn baby and been in awe? What glory! The image of God, not yet totally ruined by the power of sin, still in some way innocent and precious. We see the good. It's awe-inspiring. A God who fills us with comfort when we pet our favorite little doggy when we come home from a hard day at work. And don't pretend that that's not a wonderful gift. Or a cat if you're one of those people. Or the God who fills, I actually wrote that in here. I even put in italics, those people. I wanted to make sure I made fun of cat lovers. I'm just allergic, okay? I think they're cool. They keep mice away, whatever. What about the God who fills me with compassion when I see a person in need? Did you ever drive by somebody and you know their cardboard sign, they've been there for days, you're like, I'm not helping this guy. I'm sure he's received plenty of money already, and you keep driving and then you feel some kind of guilt about it? Something in your heart thinks, maybe I should have helped him. Where does that even come from, if not compassion, which is so surreal and inhuman? Humans aren't compassionate by nature. That is a gift of God, that we care for one another, that we have any kind of guilt when we see suffering. Even that is a miracle, if you think about it. Survival instinct doesn't always take over. Sometimes compassion finds its way into our hearts. We're willing to sacrifice for the good of another. That's God. What about the God we find in moments where we laugh until tears are falling and we can't stop laughing? It's just uncontrolled laughter. Have you ever felt that before? Just like gut-busting laughter. What a gift. I've hardly ever felt better in my life than when I've laughed with Kylie and we don't even know why we're laughing and we're just laughing and we can't stop laughing. It's just the best feeling. Or the God who's known in the whistling of the wind in the pine trees on a cool fall day as you hike the trail. Or the God you see, even the most avowed atheist sees this. The God that is beyond the horizon of the vast ocean when you can't even see any further. And you know someone made that? It's awe-inspiring. When you look across the vastness of space, the depth of space, much of which we've never explored or have any understanding of, and we think it just goes on and on and on for light years. The God we see in every beautiful work of art. The God we feel in every moving piece of music. Wonderful. The God who brings tears to the eyes of so many when that couple recites their vows and describe love without condition. God is there. God is everywhere. He's not in this building. In fact, there are weeks I feel him less in this building than I do in the parking lot when I'm hugging somebody goodbye. That's a hard thing to admit when I work here, but it's true. There are weeks when a conversation I have out there in the parking lot and a tearful hug feels more like God than the songs I sang in this room with all of you. I feel God in both places, but sometimes he feels closer. And it's usually not in here. It's usually somewhere out there. So I don't come here to find that. I come here because I see it every day. And I have to go somewhere to honor it, to worship him with others who see the same things that I see, who are filled with awe and have to go glorify God as the people did in Luke 5. God is everywhere. My kids understand this. My kids don't come here to find God. They tell me all the time, God's everywhere, Daddy. God's in this Lego. I'm like, no, that's not exactly right, bud. I guess the energies of God, now let's get deep in Eastern here. From the beginning, the church has said that the energies of God imbue everything. The only reason anything is because God is. There would be nothing without God. He is ontological being in itself. I lost all of you with that one. But it's true, right? There is nothing without God. There are no Legos without God because God is being, and there is nothing without him. So there is some truth to that. And even my 5-year-old can comprehend without all the philosophical mumbo-jumbo. He doesn't know the jargon, but he understands all that is because God is. And he can appreciate the beauty in that. He can celebrate that. My kids see this. It's the first thing we teach kids in kids' church. Kylie teaches them this all the time. God is everywhere. God is always with you. Omnipresent. They don't know how to spell it, but they know what it means. God is with them. And yet it is one of the first things we forget when we grow old into the cynicism of adulthood. When it creeps up behind us, and next thing you know, we're grumpy curmudgeons. What happened to us? It's hard to understand. You used to dream of growing up and finding adventure, and instead you grew up and you found a job. You longed for freedom, to joyfully carve a path through this world, and now you begrudgingly pay a mountain of bills. You used to love so freely and give your all to another. And now many of us love reservedly, reluctantly. We give our almost. You used to imagine a future. Now you just reminisce about the past. What happened to you? What happened to you? I'm not sure, but I'm afraid it happened to me too. Do we still have, God is whispering to me right now and to you, do you still have the capacity to wonder, to be amazed? Because that's what will make you glorify God. That's what will lead you to worship. Jesus famously said in Matthew 19:14, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to kids like these, to people such as these." I really used to think that verse meant innocence, that the kingdom of heaven belongs to the innocent. That's what I associate with children, until I had kids of my own. And now I know that that's clearly not what he meant. He did not mean because little kids are so innocent. That's the kind of people I want, innocent little sinless people, because my kids are anything but innocent. God bless you. No, what I think he meant, the only thing I think he could have meant that makes kids different than adults, if you really think about it, is their capacity for wonder. And the context helps us to see that, because right after the children come to Jesus and he lays hands on them and prays over them, they don't ask for anything. They don't really do anything. They just show up and they receive Jesus and he receives them, and that's the end of the story. And then right after that, it says that a rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he has questions. What do I need to do to be saved? Which commands do I need to follow? Which commands are the most important? How do I do this? His questions are about obedience, about works, about doctrine, about goals, about success, things that children never care about. Kids don't ask about those things. Kids don't come to Jesus and say, what do I need to do, Jesus? What do I have to do to get by, to reach this goal, to succeed in this thing? Kids just love Jesus. They're just in awe of him. And he says, that's what heaven looks like. You don't get in by earning a place. You simply come in because you don't know where else to go. There's nowhere else you'd rather be but here with me in awe and wonder. Children don't care about the stuff that grown-ups care about. That's why they just want to be near to Jesus. There's another word for wonder in English, one that our ancestors used to use, and that's the word marvel. We don't really use that anymore except for comic book characters, right, in the Marvel universe. But we don't really use the word marvel for anything else, as far as I know. How many of you use the word marvel in your day-to-day life? Probably not. But people used to do this thing. I know it's going to sound crazy. They used to do this thing called going marveling. They went marveling. And what they meant was they would go find cool things outside and then come back and show each other what they found. This is what poor Appalachian people used to do because they didn't have TV and some of them were illiterate. And so you know what they did? Your ancestors, my ancestors, do you know what they did? They went out marveling. And they would just find cool stuff out in nature and then they'd come back and talk about it. We don't really do that anymore. Kids do it sometimes without even being told. But when you grow up, you don't do that. I don't go out in the woods and just find cool stuff, right? So this week, I read about that, and I thought, don't just talk about it, be about it. So Ethan and I and Hudson went marveling, and I took some pictures. All right, so first of all, I don't have a picture of this, but when I took Hudson's Lunchable and put his Kool-Aid packet into the water bottle, he went, oh, because it all turned red instantly, okay? And Ethan noticed that. That was cool. Let's see some of these pictures. All right, so first thing we found out in the fire pit out here, this marvelous ant mound, an ant hill, right? Little ants carrying grains of sand in and out, in and out. And Hudson and I just stared at that for a few minutes and thought, how incredible that there are little ant hills like this scattered all over the field at church. Probably millions of ants just on our property building these little mounds all over, and we're not even aware of it. It's just happening under our feet. Incredible. I never think about that. And then there's this cool little mushroom. It made me terribly sick after I ate it, but it was, I'm just kidding. I didn't eat it. All right. But amazing. In the midst of all the green grass, I didn't even see it, but Hudson said, oh, look at that. And he saw this tiny white mushroom. You can't tell in the picture, but it was very small. And then this, he said, look at these beautiful flowers. That is a weed. I believe it was weed-eated the next day by a church volunteer, right? But he saw gorgeous flowers. And aren't they gorgeous? Look at that bright purple. And to me, that's a nuisance. I want that out of my yard because I want to see more bland green grass blades. Too much of this beautiful purple stuff, right? Just mowing your lawn is evidence enough that you've lost all sense of wonder. Okay. Let's move along. Man, isn't that cute? Look at it, more weeds, right? He's infatuated. He said, can I take these home to mommy? And I said, no, buddy, no. Then he pointed out there and said, look out for the alligator. Okay, there's no alligator out there. Just in case you were wondering, there's no alligator behind the church. And then he said something about a shark, and then very quickly realized there's no water either, so there's no shark. But I took a picture of where he pointed, and then I realized, look at all the shades of color on the leaves. I walk past those leaves, drive past them every day pretty much, and I never pay attention to all these different shades of green and yellow and orange and red. Absolutely gorgeous. God made every last leaf on every tree just so you and I could look at the beauty of it, just to paint these gorgeous fall landscapes and to oxygenate the air, right, I guess, and reverse our carbon dioxide, something like that. I know there's some science too, right? Trees have other purposes besides being pretty, but they are pretty, aren't they? Were there any other pictures? Oh, yeah. He found a stick and said, this is to beat the alligator if he comes at us. Yeah. He looks so intimidating, huh? Okay, so we'll stop there for a second. So then I picked the girls up from school that afternoon, and I said, hey, I did something with Hudson earlier. I wanted to ask your opinions. What's one thing in all the world that is so precious, so beautiful, so amazing, so wonderful, that it makes you think of God, that it makes you want to worship God? And without hesitation, they both said an answer at the exact same moment. Ada said sapphire, which is this betta fish that we have at home. And she feeds it every morning and every evening, and sometimes more than she should. She worries about it, asks if the fish is okay. Okay, she's a nurturer. She loves animals. And so her instinct was a betta fish. I said, why? Elaborate. And I know that I talk too much because my kids know what elaborate means. So apparently I asked them to elaborate a lot because she just immediately was like, well, what I mean is, and she said, it's part of God's beautiful creation, and I get to take care of it. I said, okay, cool. And Mirabelle said one that was weird. She said Gwen. And many of you won't know who that is, but that's her best friend at school from recess. And I said, Gwen, huh. Now that's a cool answer. Why did you say that, Mirabelle? And she said, I wrote it down. Because Gwen is my friend that I see every day, and she is so fun at recess, and she's kind to everyone, and she's strong, and I love her a lot. And I literally pulled the car over and wrote all that down because I was like, that's too good. Her friend inspires wonder and makes her think of God. I wonder if my friends do that for me. They do. I just don't appreciate it enough. Wonder. I got home and told Kylie about it. She was disappointed I didn't ask her, so I did. It was like a pity ask. I said, okay, fine. What do you find so amazing in the world, so wonderful, that it makes you think of God? What is it? And she said, my children, which is every parent's answer, right? She said, my children. Of course we get it. We've already mentioned how precious and beautiful children are. But I said, elaborate. And she said, what does that mean? No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to find out if she really listens to these on YouTube. Now, I said elaborate, and she said, because children are creation within creation. She's so meta. This is deep. I thought, okay. She said, like creation inception, like a dream within a dream. I am a created child of God, but I get to create children of God in my own body, and then I get to raise them. It's amazing. And I said, okay, that is really cool. I'm glad I asked you. I'm glad you asked me to ask you. I really do love that story in Luke chapter 5, but it reminded me of another story, and one that is, I believe, a purposeful parallel in the book of Acts. So I want to look at that real quick, and then we're done. Acts chapter 3. In fact, the band could come up now if you'd like. I'll read it out loud so you get to hear the story too. But as the band comes back up, and as you turn to Acts 3, I want to read to you a parallel account. This is not Jesus now, but his apostles. These are his followers after he's ascended into heaven, and his friends go out and begin the work of ministry in the name of Christ. They are forming churches. They're bringing people together to worship. Remember, the first question of the day was, why are my family and friends not more involved in church? What is it keeping them from coming to the church and being part of our Christian community? Why are they not plugged in? And I really believe it's a lack of wonder. And then I read this story and I thought, yep, for once I'm right. I think I'm right about this. I'm going to read it to you and see if you agree. Verses 1 through 12. Now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour, and a man lame from birth was being carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, that is called the Beautiful Gate, to ask alms of those entering the temple. So here again is a man at the temple, lame from birth, being carried on a mat by his friends. It's a very similar story. Seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked to receive alms, and Peter directed his gaze at him, as did John, and he said, "Look at us." So he fixed his attention on them and expected to receive something from them. But Peter said, "I don't have any money." He said, "I have no silver or gold, but what I do have, I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." And he took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were made strong. And leaping up, he stood and began to walk and entered the temple with them. And all the people saw him walking and praising God, recognizing him, that he's the one who sat at the Beautiful Gate of the temple that used to ask for alms. So they were filled with wonder and amazement at what had happened to him. While he clung to Peter and John, all the people, utterly astounded, ran together to them in the portico called Solomon's. And when Peter saw it, he addressed the people. And I love what he asked. He said, "Men of Israel, why do you wonder at this? Why do you stare at us as though by our own power or piety we have made him walk?" And he goes on to preach a sermon, and he basically says, that's what God always does. Why are you still amazed by it? The implication isn't you're supposed to quit being amazed. The question is, why did it take this great miracle for you to remember that God is doing amazing things all the time, every day, all around you? Why do you have to see a lame man come up and walk in order to remember that God is with you? And so I ask you today, do you have the capacity to wonder? Would you stand with me? That's what God does. He does marvelous things. I didn't have to go very far to marvel. I literally walked across a parking lot here at church in Gallia County, Ohio, and found dozens of things that made me think of how great God is. I wonder what would happen if you go marveling this afternoon in your own life. Do you have capacity for wonder? God, in case you don't, because how many of you are actually going to do homework from a sermon? Because I know you're not going to go marveling this afternoon. Maybe you will. Now I've guilt-tripped you. Maybe you really will. But whether or not you do, God invites you to do it every Sunday at this table. Every week at this table, he invites you into a space of wonder and mystery. The early church called it that, the mystery of the Eucharist, or the Eucharistic mystery, that somehow when we eat and drink, we are connected to the body and blood of Christ, crucified and raised for us. Out of love, unconditioned love, utter devotion, absolute compassion, unending mercy, all these beautiful things at this table. Do you see it like little children with wonder? Do you still have the capacity to wonder? Let's find out.